I don't want to call anyone out, but we're waiting on one person. All right, we're going to go and get started anyway. Because the ranking member's here. How are you?
Fine.
Good. Your staff might have told me you were on the way. All right. Subcommittee will come to order. I ask unanimous consent the chair be authorized to declare recess at any time to today's hearing. Without objection, it is so ordered.
I also ask unanimous consent the members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered.
Without objection, so ordered. As a reminder, if members wish to insert a document to the record, please also email it to documentsti@mail.house.gov. Am I going? Okay. I now recognize myself for the purposes of an opening statement for 5 minutes. I want to thank the witnesses for being here today, and I want to thank all the members for the extraordinary work that was done this Congress on the FAA Reauthorization bill. Look, everyone here can talk about things that were frustrating and problems this Congress, and I certainly have my robust list of items. But when I think back to some of the top 5 accomplishments, this bill is in the top 5. This was something that, in my opinion, really demonstrates how this place is supposed to work, and especially how this committee is supposed to work. And I want to give a big shout out to Chairman Sam Graves. Last time I get to do this, my father, and to Ranking Member Larson, and to my good friend Steve Cohen, because this was a complicated process. As Hunter and the entire team will tell you, well over 2,000 submissions from stakeholders, from members of Congress, making requests or identifying problems in the aviation space, over 2,000. And this bill addressed the far majority of those. This legislation, despite the dysfunctional, polarized, divisive Congress that we have, this bill passed the House of Representatives. Let me start. It passed out of this committee unanimously. It passed out of the House of Representatives by a vote of 351 to 69, and ultimately the conference report passed out of the House of Representatives by a vote of 387 to only 26 confused or otherwise misunderstood folks. And so, I mean, that's huge in this polarized environment. I'll say it again, 87 to 26. Which really was amazing. And look, when we started this, even before we knew who was going to be in the majority, there was an agreement among all that we were going to do this on a bipartisan basis, that we're going to do this in an agreement that made sure that we addressed the key issues in aviation, and really, really excited about the progress that's been made. I want to remind you, people said the margins are too narrow, you're not going to get a bill, you'll never make it bipartisan. How many extensions or how many years of extensions will we be looking at before we actually do a bill? And the other thing is, with the amazing pace of innovation, based upon a lot of the folks that you're representing here today, the amazing pace of innovation, there was so much stuff that needed to be done, and folks said that you'll never be able to address all the needs in this bill. So we got it right, at least 90+% right, really, really excited, but having it in the law is only the first step in the process. The next thing is actually having the FAA abide by the law, having the FAA stick with the deadlines, the timelines, and the priorities that we've identified in this legislation, because All of us here can tell stories about the FAA, about the Corps of Engineers, about FEMA, and many other agencies that completely ignore the laws or write them in ways that were not consistent with congressional intent. That's absolutely critical, and it's why we're having this hearing today. This is my final hearing as Aviation Subcommittee Chair, and I want to emphasize some points about the implementation of the bill that I hope members will carry forward in the 119th Congress and beyond. First of all, it's critical implementation of the law, and for American leadership in aviation, the FAA better step up and lead on the integration of new aviation technologies. Our aviation leadership in the past is no guarantee of leadership in the future, and too often the FAA spends too much time looking for every reason to say no when it has every reason to actually say yes. Other countries sense weakness right now, and they're circling like vultures to permanently shut this country out from the next golden era of aviation. Our bill provides a roadmap to respond to this challenge, but unless the FAA starts the car, a roadmap is just that, a roadmap. Second, we have to center on average Americans, the passenger, and their experience in everything this subcommittee does. I talk about this at every hearing, and I'm going to keep doing it. Because I think oftentimes we silo or look at only different components of the passenger experience. It may be the parking lot, it may be checking in bags, it may be the TSA experience, it may be going through concessions, it may be their experience at the gate, it may be what they're getting on the app in terms of air traffic control information, it may be their experience on the plane. My good friend Mr. Cohen likes to talk about seats all the time. It may be on the back end in baggage claim. No one is looking at that comprehensive experience, and we've got to do a better job because that is our job in Congress, is looking at that common experience, the common process, that passenger experience to make sure that it's actually sewn together in a way that makes sense. I think that's absolutely critical. Things like air traffic control, having the best data, the best technology, procurement and acquisition has been a massive problem. And finally, this subcommittee and all stakeholders need to hold the FAA accountable for actually implementing the law, or the accomplishment this year will simply evaporate. I've made no secret of my frustrations with the FAA missing deadlines and having failed to complete mandates from the 2018 or even the 2016 FAA laws, and that can't happen again. If history's any guide, the FAA will resist any uncomfortable change, no matter how necessary, with robust oversight from this subcommittee and call-outs from industry. We finished all of our victory laps in getting the bill passed. Now it's time to make sure that the FAA is implementing the bill in accordance with the letter of the law and congressional intent. So I want to say again, huge thanks. Sorry for going over time. Huge thanks to Chairman Sam Graves. Sam, thank you for trusting me with this absolutely important or critical subcommittee. Thank you for the mentorship. There is not a chairman of the Transportation Committee in the history of this Congress, probably in the future of this Congress, that is going to have the aviation experience or knowledge as Chairman Sam Graves. I want to give a huge shout out to some of the wise and passionate staff directors, Holly Woodruff-Lyons and of course Hunter, the team, Laney Copeland, Julie Devine, Chris Sen, Andrew Giancini, Will Moore, Corey Seitz, and Jamie Hopkins, T&I Comms Director Justin, Harker Road, Justin, thanks. I know that I rarely read things, and it makes it a pain in the rear to do the statements. So thanks to you for your efforts there to try and put words to my diatribes. And lastly, to our witnesses for being here today. Tell us where the FAA is doing well, where they've already managed to fall behind, and helping to identify priorities and triage and moving forward. Ensure that the FAA is able to carry through on the promise of the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024 will be a full-time job, but I have no doubt this subcommittee will rise to the challenge and continue to do great things. I now recognize my great friend, Steve Cohen, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it has been an honor to serve alongside you here on this subcommittee the past 2 years. It's been the most important subcommittee I've served on in my 18 years in Congress, and working with you has allowed us to work together in a bipartisan fashion, along with Mr. Graves and my ranking member, my leader, Mr. Larson, in getting this bill passed. Your leadership on this committee has been phenomenal, and when they go back, in my opinion, they look at Louisiana, they'll think of Billy Cannon, Harry Connick, the Mannings, and Mr. Graves. While the 118th Congress is on track to become one of the least productive in U.S. history, that's not the case of this committee, where earlier this year we passed overwhelmingly bipartisan support the long-term FAA Reauthorization bill. It's been over 6 months since the FAA Reauthorization was signed into law, so it's time to ensure compliance with the instructions contained therein. The bill aimed to address numerous challenges facing our aviation system. They include the modernization of safety and technology infrastructure, the integration of new entrants into U.S. skies, including drones that are called airplanes, the shortage of air traffic controllers, and the poor treatment of airline passengers, especially passengers with disabilities. Our witnesses today come from across the aviation sector, and they will provide valuable insights into the status of various provisions in the law. One provision particularly important to me, other than seat sizes, is to implement the overdue NTSB recommendation requiring airplanes flying long overwater routes to have better black box technology, which will allow investigators to recover flight data and cockpit recordings without the need to search the ocean floor. Two technologies can make this possible. One is data streaming through satellites, which sends black box data in real time. The other is deployable flight data recorder, which float on the water after a crash. A major aircraft manufacturer is already using this technology, making it much faster and easier for investigators to access the critical information. With advanced technology available today, it's a no-brainer, so we're happy it's now law. The committee has taken great strides to improve transparency for the flying public and ensure our safety investigators have the information needed to prevent accidents. So it's important to me this provision is implemented adequately. As we begin the 119th Congress next, which we will in January, this subcommittee will conduct ongoing oversight of the FAA. And we hope that if there's a change in administrators at the FAA, it'll be somebody who has intimate knowledge of this bill and is able to implement it and work well with this committee. We look forward to ensuring full compliance with the law. We will also work to provide the resources necessary for the FAA to carry out its statutory authority and to enact any additional legislation necessary to ensure the safety and efficiency of our nation's airspace. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Thank you, Mr. Graves, for your service and your friendship, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. Recognize the full committee chairman, Sam Graves, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's imperative that we conduct rigorous oversight of the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024 to ensure that the FAA follows the letter of the law and is held accountable for meeting key deadlines that Congress has set. And I look forward to hearing from each of our witnesses. Thank you all for being here, and look forward to hearing your perspective on the FAA's efforts to implement the new aviation law as we work together to advance American aviation. Everyone here knows that I could spend more than my share of time identifying late provisions and talking at length about how the FAA should do its job. But I want to use my time to recognize that today is my colleague, Chairman Garrett Graves. This is his last hearing at the committee. Garrett's work on the committee, especially his leadership in helping craft the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024, has solidified his legacy as a staunch advocate for aviation. Over this Congress, he has worked to advance solutions that propel new technologies, improve the passenger experience for all travelers, and bolster the aviation workforce. And anyone who knows or works with Garrett and his team to push a bill forward knows that Garrett gives it everything that he has and then some to get the job done. His efforts were instrumental in getting this bill over the finish line, and I'm grateful for his partnership and his friendship over the years. Garrett, thank you for your work on the committee and the subcommittee, and I look forward to seeing what you do next. And with that, I'll yield back.
Me too. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I, like many of us, are disappointed that the cameras in the hallway were not here to cover Garrett Graves' last hearing. However, it's good that we're all here to be here and to honor him, though, for his work in this committee, but also in the House as a whole, and also for his personal friendship and our getting to know each other over the fact that I represented his in-laws for some time, and a lot of his family members in my district as well. But I want to thank him for calling the hearing today on the implementation of the 24 FAA law. In response to these challenges that aviation faces over the last few years, Congress did rise to the occasion. This committee engaged in a thorough process. We negotiated and compromised to reach a bipartisan and bicameral solution to deliver for the flying public. I want to thank today's witnesses as well for providing critical input during that time as we work through this process from the bill's introduction to the final passage. Now, whether supporting the integration of new entrants in the airspace or overseeing the FAA's commitment to a safer and more efficient national airspace. Your enthusiasm, Garrett, your expertise, your partnership will be missed. We will all miss that. So I wish you the best of luck in your future endeavors. Now, the passage of the 24 FAA reauthorization was only the first step in ensuring the U.S. remains the gold standard in aviation safety, efficiency, and innovation. For instance, the law will increase the safety and efficiency of our airspace and help prevent close calls and near misses on airport runways across the country. An FAA NAS safety review team report on this found that air traffic controller staff shortages actively erode the margin of safety in the national airspace. To address these workforce and safety concerns, the law includes several provisions, including the FAA to do several things, include hire the maximum number of controllers annually, improve its controller staffing model, and expand the deployment of surface surveillance and detection equipment at U.S. airports. The law also calls on the FAA to take decisive actions to address aging FAA air traffic control legacy systems. These crucial reforms will ultimately enhance the long-term efficiency and safety of our national airspace while creating good-paying aviation jobs. Passenger safety also depends on worker safety, and as we emerged from the pandemic and air travel demand surged, there were an alarming number of unruly passenger incidents, endangering flight crews and passengers alike. And so to address this threat, the law created a task force to prevent such assaults and mandated airlines to establish employee assault and response plans. Meanwhile, recent flight disruptions have shaken the flying public's confidence in air travel. For example, earlier this year, certain air carriers were unable to cope with the global IT outage, leaving thousands of passengers stranded. To get us back on the right trajectory, the law required airlines to provide full cash refunds to consumers affected by delayed or canceled flights and develop policies addressing reimbursement for passengers for hotel and meal costs when a flight is canceled or significantly delayed. So while reimbursing passengers affected by flight disruptions is one way to protect consumers, we have to do more to ensure every passenger can travel safely and with dignity. And the FAA reauthorization improves training for airline personnel and contractors to better assist travelers with disabilities and directs the DOT to create a roadmap for airlines to reduce damage to wheelchairs and mobility aids. The law also increases funding for the Airport Improvement Program from $3.35 to $4 billion annually, of which at least $150 million in discretionary funds, the largest portion that's ever been required before, are to be spent on airport climate, noise, and other environmental impacts. Moreover, AIP funding can now be used to invest in infrastructure for alternative propulsion technologies by allowing airports to fund the development of hydrogen and electrification infrastructure necessary to support new aircraft. Finally, the law improves the lives of neighboring airport communities by requiring the FAA to develop a plan to transition away from leaded fuel in general aviation by 2030 and takes actions to mitigate the impacts of aviation noise across the country. Lastly, I want to talk about the talent pool because the FAA reauthorization made robust investments in the American aviation workforce, providing resources to expand and strengthen the talent pool, a requirement for American innovation. For instance, the law invests $60 million annually in aviation workforce development grants to grow the next generation aviation manufacturer workers, maintenance technicians, and pilots. Now, the current and future challenge facing the U.S. aviation system are significant but not insurmountable, and I believe together we can meet these challenges. Congress did its job in passing the 2024 FAA reauthorization this past May. And now the FAA and the DOT need to do their jobs to effectively implement the programs and fulfilling the various provisions. I would note, again, I want to emphasize something that the chair said. Our vote here in the House was 387 to 26, and the Senate was 88 to 4. We know where those 30 people live. But we also know this, a strong bipartisan, bicameral support for the FAA reauthorization. The FAA and the DOT knows the job it needs to do because Congress told the FAA and the DOT the job that it needs to do over the next several years. As the new administration comes on board, we want to both help the administration move forward on the work that we assign to the DOT and the FAA to do this, and we can all be successful in doing that, and we help the administration to do that because they already have clear direction on what it needs to do. So with that, I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about the implementation, and again, I'll thank my good friend Garrett Graves for his service here at the committee and to the House. Thanks, Garrett.
Thank you, Ranking Member Larson. Recognize Ranking Member Cohen for unanimous consent request.
Thank you, sir. First, I'd like to welcome our witnesses, thank them for being here today to help us with this. and I'd like to take a moment to explain our lighting system. The first light is green. It has nothing to do with any new deal or anything. It means you're on. Yellow doesn't mean to be chicken. It means you're running out of time, which may be chickening out before you get the red light where you get the fuel of the buzzer.
We wrote
Red
you a
means you're
script.
over.
We wrote you a script.
I'm like you, I ad-libbed.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that I be allowed to ad-lib and that the witness's full statements be included in the record.
Object. That objection.
Mr. Chairman, I also ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing.
That objection, so ordered.
I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing.
With that objection, so ordered.
As your written testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee asks that you limit your oral remarks to 5 minutes. The red light, 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. I ask unanimous consent to enter statements from AUVSI/CDA and Reliable Robotics, into the record. Without objection, so ordered. With that, Mr. Terry, you're recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Good morning. I'm Jason Terreri, the Executive Director of the Syracuse Regional Airport Authority in New York. I'm also here today as my capacity as the Chair of the U.S. Policy Council for Airports Council International North America, the trade association for America's airports. Chairman Sam Graves, Chairman Garrett Graves, Ranking Member Larson, and Ranking Member Cohen. Thank you for having me here today to share the commercial service airport's perspective on FAA reauthorization implementation. On behalf of the airport industry, I'd like to start by saying thank you. Once fully implemented, the FAA Reauthorization Bill of 2024 will have significant and positive impacts across the entire airport system. And Subcommittee Chairman Graves, thank you for all you have done to help and support airports. I appreciate this opportunity to explain our position on the Act's implementation, including the work both the FAA and Congress need to do to bring this bill's promise to fruition. It is vital that the FAA implements the statutory provisions consistent with congressional intent, and your rigorous oversight through hearings like this are critical to ensure that happens. The $4 billion in AIP funding and formula changes included in the Act will allow airports to benefit from both AIP entitlement dollars, allowing airports to prioritize important infrastructure projects at their facilities for years to come. While we wait for the resolution of the fiscal year 2025 spending bills, the FAA has not responded to the airport's request for a general sense of how much entitlement dollars will be allocated under the new formulas. We understand that nothing is certain as it comes to funding, but it is incredibly difficult to plan for projects without having a better idea of how much money we might receive. Also, once the appropriations process is complete, and I emphasize again that the AIP needs a full year of appropriated funding at the $4 billion level to ensure it functions properly, and we ask for your continued oversight to ensure new formulas are executed in the manner you intended. Next, I'd like to highlight two provisions that Congress had to include in the 2024 bill because the FAA failed to implement the provisions from the 2018 bill. First is Section 776, which expands to all airports the streamlined process for imposing and utilizing passenger facility charges for infrastructure projects, while maintaining all current public consultation and comment requirements will help the airport infrastructure projects get underway more expeditiously. The FAA should immediately begin rulemaking by this legislation, as airports cannot take advantage of a streamlined process until the FAA's work is complete. The second is Section 743, which prohibits the FAA from regulating the land use of certain airport property that was purchased with local funds. This issue has directly impacted my airport and has hurt others too. Businesses have walked away from economic development opportunities because FAA regulatory determinations take far too long. The FAA should move quickly to amend its land use policy and to account for this new statute. I hope we get a chance to discuss this further today. On another matter, the airports appreciate this committee's work to facilitate the transition to aircraft firefighting foams that do not contain high levels of PFAS chemicals. Directing the FAA to provide regular transition updates and authorizing funding for airports to transition to the new foams were key provisions in the 2024 Act. We are eager to move forward with any transition funding Congress provides, but as with AIP, we are awaiting appropriations. We are grateful of many members of this committee that signed on to the letter spearheaded by Congressman Carbajal and Lawler on the need for this funding. We expect to talk to you all more in the new Congress about this transition and other issues involving PFAS at airports. I would like to conclude with an issue that we spent a lot of time on in Syracuse through our work with the New York Air National Guard and New Air, which is the integration of new entrants into the national airspace system. From my experience as the only airport in the United States that has fully integrated drone operations, it is essential for airport operators to be at the table with FAA as they proceed and develop the implementation of an updated air traffic management system. We also need close collaboration with both FAA and prospective AAM and UAS operators regarding the airport and vertiport infrastructure needed to support future operations. And finally, we need Congress to pass updated UAS detection and mitigation authorities to our federal partners, along with airports and other operators of critical infrastructure, a strong legislative framework upon which to address UAS threats. In closing, I want to thank you for listening to our concerns and incorporating many of our industry's top policy issues into the recent FAA Reauthorization bill that has been, now that the bill has been signed, there is still a lot of work to do. We will continue to do our part and look forward to working with you and the FAA on the implementation of this important legislation. Thank you.
Mr. Terry, thank you. I want to say, I think I can speak for the full panel here, that we have great frustration with the FAA's lack of clarity to you as well in regard to the 5-year authorization levels. The reason we do a 5-year bill is to provide that clarity and certainty moving forward. And so just know that you have a number of allies. We did it for a reason, we wrote it for a reason, and we are pushing them to get the information out to airports as soon as possible. Mr. Woodward, thank you for being back. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, members of the subcommittee, and thank you, Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Larson, Subcommittee Chairman Graves, and Subcommittee Ranking Member Cohen for inviting me to offer my perspective on the implementation of the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024. I'm here in my capacity as the Chief Executive Officer of Wing, a logistics company focused on package delivery by drone of retail goods, food items, and medical supplies. My testimony will offer a broad overview of where we've been, where we're going, and what you can do now to help American industry. A year and a half ago, as this committee was ramping up its efforts to assemble an FAA reauthorization bill, I testified about the need for a predictable and pragmatic approach to drone integration and a regulatory framework that will allow us to fly by rule rather than by exception. For several years in the United States, progress had stalled. This committee recognized that and acted in a bipartisan fashion to provide oversight and craft sensible policy solutions to advance safe drone integration. I'm thankful to Congress and to this committee's leadership that the Reauthorization Act of 2024 includes numerous provisions that enable the FAA to move the drone operations forward. This is working, and we're making real progress again in the United States. The FAA has streamlined the waiver process and created a new criteria for making determinations that enables timely updates to our hardware and software. It has approved beyond visual line of sight operations and enabled us to fly with our detect and avoid systems without the need for visual observers. And in North Texas, industry has implemented a UAS traffic management structure overseen by the FAA, which provides a framework for commercial BVLOS operators that is repeatable nationwide and has drawn interest from stakeholders all around the globe. This has enabled true expansion in the domestic market. This year, Wing's delivery service has grown across the DFW area, where we currently operate from 16 partner locations with a service area covering an estimated population of over 2 million people. We are operating every day with the United States' largest employer with Walmart and its largest food aggregator with DoorDash, delivering tens of thousands of orders this year alone. We can also now field the best versions of our service, rolling out timely updates to aircraft hardware and software that improve accessibility and capabilities to our customers. We've seen how drone delivery can improve the experience of customers day to day, and we've seen the impact drone delivery can have when it matters the most as we conducted disaster assistance in North Carolina in partnership with Walmart after Hurricane Helene. We've done this while continuing to build relationships with the communities we operate in and around. We participated in some of General Aviation's largest events, allowing aviators and the general public to see what drone delivery actually looks like, and showing these communities how we can safely share airspace. We continue to have the support from the communities we operate in, showing that there is true economic and customer demand for these services. And this progress has given us confidence to invest further in the US market and has come from the positive changes that we've seen at the FAA because of your work. Beyond our operations in Texas and Virginia, we are now looking to further expand into more states, starting with North Carolina and then further into Florida next year. Companies across our industry have seen similar advances in their operations, and this progress has been truly transformative for our businesses. So I want to ask for your continued support and oversight as the FAA reauthorization moves towards implementation over the coming year. First, we need to publish the BVLOS draft notice of proposed rulemaking. It is critical to get this rule out to allow for public and industry comment. Second, the FAA must work to streamline the environmental approval process. This remains the longest lead item for expansion and must see a more programmatic and nationwide approach to this process. While the FAA is making strides here, the progress is still slow. Third, we must consider a pragmatic approach to hazardous materials treatment. The FAA must provide a more sensible approach for small drones to carry everyday items like thermometers, small batteries, and over-the-counter medicine. And fourth, the FAA must continue to focus on implementing Section 927, which calls for the FAA to streamline and improve the process of issuing 44807 waivers. The great news is that the FAA reauthorization bill provides a blueprint for all of this, and your oversight is critical to ensure that the FAA now builds to the outcomes that you intended and cements the gains that have been made so far. Before I close my remarks, I'd like to take a moment to offer my congratulations to Subcommittee Chairman Garrett Graves for his long career and committed public service. Today's hearing is an opportunity to recognize your lifelong pursuit of advancing sensible policy solutions. Your constituents in Louisiana and indeed the whole aviation sector are better for it. We wish you well on your future endeavors. I thank the leadership of this committee for the opportunity to participate in today's hearing, and I would please answer your questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Woodworth. You said you're expanding in Louisiana. Is that what I heard? Thank you. Next, we're going to go to Mr. Bunce. Thank you for being back in the committee. I know your punch card's almost full in terms of the number of times you've been here. I also know that you're moving toward next phase in life, and I do want to thank you for your distinguished service, of course, in the United States Air Force, where I met you, probably 25 years ago, and for your great stakeholder representation over the years. You've been a good ally to us in helping us identify issues and solutions, and I want to thank you for being back, recognize you for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and during those 25 years that you and I have known each other, I just have been so impressed with the way you approach policy and your service to the nation, and I can't thank you enough. And the proof is really in the pudding with what you all did together, you working with Mr. Cohen and Mr. Larson and Sam Graves, all working together, and this whole committee. Those of us that make our living in this profession, you made us proud that you could get together when we were all in this room at the very beginning of the Congress, and they said, the drama's gonna be down the hall. We're gonna get our work done here, and you did it. And it wasn't just the bill itself, it was the hearing process that led up to it, because the FAA started listening. One of our big issues that we absolutely need to live on into the new administration is rulemaking. Rulemaking was broken. The FAA would use this ex parte as a reason not to even talk to foreign authorities as they're going through the long rulemaking process. Things sat on the shelf for years and years. And what did the FAA do? They started listening to you, and they started promulgating rules and getting a process going. It's not perfect yet, it isn't moving fast enough, but it's going forward, and that's why we cannot go back to that 2-for-1 for aviation. That idea that we could get rid of 2 rules or more for every one we promulgate works for other agencies, and I'm all for less government regulation, but in aviation, we can't do anything without a regulation. They are enabling, and that goes to policy and guidance. So we really look to you to be able to help us make sure we emphasize to the new administration that that's very important. Successes that have happened because of the pressure that you put on the FAA, the release of the SFAR, which basically is the operational rules that allow advanced air mobility aircraft to enter into the system, now is published, which now, once the aircraft are certified, hopefully next year, they'll start entering service. And in a compendium to that is the Advanced Air Mobility Leadership and Coordination Act that you, Chairman Graves, along with Member David, when you published that, it got an all-of-government approach to look for advanced air mobility. And we were just briefed by DOT last week. They're getting ready to release the final report, but we need the new administration to embrace it, because that is the way the United States will lead in this transformation of technology. And so we hope that you will all emphasize to the new administration the importance of moving that forward. As Ranking Member Larson mentioned, what we've done with workforce is critically important, and we hope the appropriators follow through in allowing the manufacturing workforce to benefit from the grants. Our companies have great programs to be able to tap into high schools, to be able to get them into their factories and encourage them, whether they're going to tech school or whether they're going to college, to be able to take advantage of scholarship programs and that. But this seed money will help those institutions be able to give us our seed corn to be able to grow our workforce. And that applies to the FAA as well. Right now, the FAA workforce, 40% have under 4 years of experience. And so they are having success recruiting out of colleges to be able to build their workforce, but they're still very green. And we all know with what has happened and our focus on production quality and things like that happen in a factory, we need very qualified people to work at the FAA, and these workforce grants will help them to recruit the workforce that we need in industry to be able to do our jobs. We also want to be able to leverage this new technology that's out there. So in the bill, you focus on mobile clearances. Becomes very important that we use digital communications to give communications to launch clearances, especially for advanced air mobility aircraft, and also to be able to go and finish the rulemaking not only on beyond visual line of sight, but what we call Mosaic, which is basically a new way to streamline the certification of light aircraft that are out there to be able to make them cheaper and more affordable for people to get into aviation and then grow in their experience to be able to be our great airline skilled workforce. The investment in facilities and equipment, Mr. Larson mentioned it. When you put the emphasis on having awareness of what's happening on runways and taxiways and everything, that becomes very important, and the FAA followed through with that to be able to deploy more cost-effective systems that use this ADS-B technology that we all pioneered several years ago to be able to help with runway awareness. So this bill has done tremendous amount of good for this nation, and we just need to keep the inertia going. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bunce. Appreciate it. And next, we're going to go to Mr. Regan. You're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Cohen, and other members of the committee. On behalf of the Transportation Trades Department, AFL-CIO, and our 37 affiliated unions, I want to thank you all for this opportunity to testify on this important legislation. As the largest transportation labor federation in the country, representing hundreds of thousands of aviation workers, we are confident that proper implementation of this bipartisan bill will strengthen aviation safety standards, sustainably grow our skilled workforce, and enhance the quality of service that travelers deserve. The number of significant aviation labor priorities are codified in this bill, including protections for airline employees against assaults, efforts to close existing safety gaps, and provisions to address the shortage of air traffic controllers. Now, these provisions must be implemented quickly and accurately. Airline workers, including flight attendants, gate agents, pilots, and other personnel, face an alarming increase in workplace assaults and have reported unprecedented levels of verbal abuse, threats, physical violence since the pandemic. It is encouraging to see Congress take meaningful steps to address this situation through a number of provisions in the 2024 FAA Reauthorization. A key measure includes setting minimum standards for self-defense training for frontline workers, empowering them to protect themselves. From the ramp to the radar room, aviation professionals ensure the safety and reliability of American air travel through their dedication, training, and expertise. This bill specifies several ways in which working conditions can and should be improved, including addressing airport ramp worker safety concerns, initiating studies on cabin air safety and radiation exposure, and promulgating lactation standards for pilots and flight attendants. This legislation also addresses a critical safety gap on the global scale. It mandates essential safety improvements for global aircraft maintenance by requiring annual unannounced inspections at foreign repair stations and establishing minimum qualifications for mechanics working on U.S. aircraft. While the 2024 reauthorization includes many important safety actions, there are long overdue safety measures like this one from previous reauthorizations. One of the most troubling remaining loopholes in the regulation of aircraft maintenance is the disparity between drug and alcohol testing for workers at domestic maintenance facilities and for those at foreign facilities who are exempt from this requirement. The 2012 reauthorization directed the FAA to issue a proposed rule requiring all repair station employees responsible for safety-sensitive maintenance on U.S. aircraft to be subject to an alcohol and controlled substance testing program within 1 year. The FAA did not issue the proposed rule until last year, that is a solid 13 years later, and is yet to be finalized. It is unacceptable that it has taken over a decade for the FAA to implement a congressionally mandated safety measure. In the 2018 reauthorization, Congress passed a statute requiring the FAA to issue a rule that all new aircraft for delivery to passenger air carriers have installed physical secondary barriers within 1 year. 5 years later, in June of 2023, the FAA finally issued a long-awaited final rule to mandate the installation of secondary barriers in all newly manufactured aircraft within 2 years. I urge you all to exercise your oversight authority to ensure that FAA takes a swifter approach to implementing the 2024 reauthorization than they did in some of the previous versions. In addition to safety, staffing shortages have also been a major concern for some of our nation's aviation workforce. Air traffic controllers keep our skies safe as they efficiently move thousands of aircraft every day throughout the national airspace system. Yet a decade of insufficient hiring has created a pressing staffing crisis among certified professional controllers, leaving our controller workforce severely strained. To address this problem, this law directs the FAA to set a stronger minimum hiring target for new controllers. And similarly, the legislation directs the FAA to conduct a comprehensive review and, as necessary, revise the FAA staffing model for aviation safety inspectors. Airport service workers, from baggage handlers to wheelchair agents to cabin cleaners, form the backbone of daily aviation operations. Yet their vital contributions remain undervalued and underprotected. This legislation requires the GAO to complete a comprehensive review of the domestic airport service workforce, reinforcing the importance of treating all segments of the aviation workforce as integral to the industry's success. From its very outset, the history of aviation has been written in hard-earned lessons shaped by a sobering reality. It can take a tragedy to reveal an unknown engineering flaw or a systemic vulnerability in established protocols. But it is also a tragedy when solutions to safety challenges like mandating flight deck barriers or greater foreign repair station oversight languish for decades after Congress requires them. When a regulatory directive mandating FAA action with 12 to 18 months stretches to 12 to 18 years on an implementation timeline, it should be equally unacceptable. For ramp workers facing jet blast hazards, for the airline crew managing cabin air quality concerns, and for every aviation safety professional who ensures our system runs smoothly and safely, implementation of this bill must happen now. We were proud to endorse this bill. We're proud to be in an industry where we can develop these bipartisan solutions and move our industry collectively better for workers and for participants. And I look forward to seeing the fruits of your labor when this bill is finally implemented. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we're going to go to questions, and I'm going to start with a senior member of the committee, Subcommittee Chairman Crawford from Arkansas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me ask if I might begin by unanimous consent to enter into the record the score from the Sunday game with Ranking Member Cohen's Memphis Tigers versus Arkansas State University. I didn't think it was supposed to go that way, Mr. Ranking Member, but 85-72, I believe.
We were generous.
Right, thank you for that. Anyway, appreciate it. Back to business. We try to have fun here as much as we can. Mr. Woodworth, I'm always concerned about how other countries are competing against our domestic industries in areas like drones, which you obviously have a lot of expertise in. And one of the recurring themes in this hearing has been rulemaking with regard to FAA and the delays associated with that. It's been terribly delayed. Can you tell me what effects the FAA's delay in issuing this rule, the rules have had on your domestic drone industry? I'm especially concerned about workforce development, manufacturing, and how we're falling behind with competitors from countries like China and other adversaries.
Yes, thank you for the question, Congressman. I think that the perfect example is sort of where I was a year and a half ago when I was before this committee talking about sort of how we were stuck. Our operations in the United States were very limited. We had a handful of sites, and most of our operations were happening overseas because that was where sort of the regulatory environment allowed for the operations to occur. That is largely due to sort of having existed in this space of an exemption-based set of approvals. So rather than having rules that you can operate by, sort of everything was going to the agency and asking for exemptions. That's a long process. That's an unpredictable process. And the unpredictable timelines for us as a business meant that we had to go show progress somewhere else. Thankfully, due to the oversight that this committee has placed on the FAA over the last year and a half, we've seen significant advances in both the sort of speed and predictability of that process. And I think that sort of the next touch point to check on that will be getting the BVLOS Notice of Proposed Rule published so that industry and other stakeholders can look at it and see if it does match the intent that you all put into the bill.
Just as a follow-up, you have any recommendations for how we can ensure the FAA meets a deadline?
I think a big element of it is making sure that that process doesn't get stuck. So, the FAA will write the rule, then it goes in the interagency processes, then it comes out for public comment, ensuring that there's sort of, the appropriate pressures on, like, let's advance the process, get the rule out so that people can comment on it, and then adjudicate those comments in a timely manner. It's hard to study for a test when you don't know what sort of the subject's going to be, and so we look forward to seeing what that rule looks like.
Excellent, thank you. I appreciate your comments, and I appreciate all y'all being here today. And before I yield the balance of my time, I do want to add my name to the list of well wishes to our chairman, our illustrious chairman, Garrett Graves. It's been an honor to serve with you, and obviously wish you all the best in every endeavor.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks. Ready to go? You ready to go? Yeah. Recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Cohen, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Reagan, I'd like to ask you a few questions. FAA currently has a 90-second evacuation standard for commercial aircraft, but that standard is based on an unrealistic studies, terribly unrealistic. The EVAC Act, which was included in the reauthorization bill, requires a new study to consider passengers with disabilities, airplanes with young and old passengers as well, animals on the plane, carry-on baggage, and other factors of realistic flights when evaluating how seat size and configuration could impact evacuations. How important, Mr. Reagan, is it important that the FAA implement this provision as soon as possible? And what are the consequences for your members if the FAA does not get this right?
Thank you for the question. I think it's critical that they implement this requirement. I mean, you're talking about, in many cases, aircraft that have been redesigned. You've had different seating arrangements. And we're talking about the process and the requirements when there is a crisis. And if there is a crisis where you have to evacuate the aircraft, the entire flight crew, on the pilots, the flight attendants, the people on the ground, first responders who are going to be responding, need to have accurate information for how to evacuate an aircraft safely and efficiently, and try to avert the worst consequences when there is a disaster. So I think this is a really important update to our regulations that should be implemented right away.
Thank you, sir. After public outrage over the treatment of passengers with disabilities and their mobility aids, such as wheelchairs, I introduced legislation to require the Department of Transportation to evaluate complaints by passengers with disabilities. This was included in the FAA Reauthorization law. Mr. Reagan, how much training do your airport service workers receive on how to appropriately assist passengers with disabilities, including both helping them on and off the aircraft and around the airport, as well as how to handle mobility aids, and what additional tools and guidance are needed from the Department of Transportation to ensure your members can meet the new requirements for handling passengers with disabilities?
Well, I think one of the things that's often overlooked about those workers who play that critical role at airports and in terms of boarding and deplaning, most of them are not employed directly by the airlines themselves. Most of them are out of subcontractors that are employing all of those important parts of the job. And in most cases, these are the lowest paid people in the entire industry. And that's something that the GAO study that was included in the bill is hoping to start to address, to bring up standards across the board, because when you have a hodgepodge of different contractors providing it, the safety training standards that you're referring to are oftentimes different depending on who the actual employer is and what their standards are. So I do think, raising the standard of living for the workers who are doing those jobs, but also having standardization across the industry for what training priorities are necessary and how they can do this job most effectively to comply with federal disability laws is a really important priority for this committee.
Thank you, sir. I also had a provision that requires commercial aircraft on long over-water routes to have black box technology that allows investigators to recover the flight data and cockpit voice recordings without searching the floor. Can you discuss the importance of having modern accident investigation technologies that do not require underwater retrieval of the black boxes?
Yes, I mean, again, we're talking about the unfortunate scenarios when something awful happens. And I assure you, if my friend Jennifer Hamady, the chair of the NTSB, were here, she would have extremely extensive knowledge about what difficulties they face in terms of properly identifying what caused an accident. And certainly access to the best data is really important for that process.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Bunch, the FAA Reauthorization Bill included numerous provisions to strengthen the aviation workforce, including maximum hiring of air traffic controllers, review of staffing requirements for aviation safety inspectors, and workforce development programs for pilots, aviation maintenance, and aviation manufacturing. Have your members seen any progress on those provisions in the FAA Reauthorization Bill?
Yes, Mr. Cohen, as we have watched the very positive pressure that this committee has put on the FAA, they really embrace the fact that they need to get their workforce out to our plants to do what we call knowledge sharing. And we don't call it training. We have an ability to go and get our technicians to sit together with the FAA technicians and teach them about the newest methodology and the technology that we incorporate into the industry. And it really does help them. As I mentioned earlier, these young people are coming straight out of college, and you know, the antiquated way that we do a lot of the things with the FAA now, we still use paper. You know, and these kids are very used to operating and manipulating 3D drawings with a computer rotating around and everything. And so this knowledge sharing also helps drive a change in the attitude in the FAA to embrace the new technology and the digitization that you all put into the bill to be able to go and let these young people use the skills that they've learned in college to properly regulate. And so I really think what you've done in the workforce is put a light on what we need to do. And as I mentioned earlier, now getting these high school kids to have an opportunity to get excited about aerospace and all the opportunities there, these grants to be able to help high schools, but also our tech schools be able to prepare our manufacturing workforce is the next element that we hope the appropriators will fund.
Thank you. Before I yield back the time that I don't have, I'd like to ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record a Transportation Workers Union of America paper on what their needs are with the FAA Reauthorization Act.
Without objection.
Thank you, and I yield back that time.
Thank you. And I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. I want to start with a few words of thanks to our outgoing subcommittee chair, Garrett Graves. He's been a good friend of mine, someone who has mentored me in this House. We will certainly miss your leadership, your quick wit, your energy. And I may also say that I've described to not only people on this committee, but other people in the House that, Mr. Chairman, I have referred to you often as my aspirational peer on policy. You really do understand what it is we do on this committee, and your thoughtful leadership has left the T&I committee, and even more specifically, the aviation subcommittee, in very good shape going forward. I know I join my colleagues in wishing you all the best in your next endeavor. I also want to thank our witnesses for being here. And you know, if you look at everything that we've accomplished here through the FAA Reauthorization bill, we have a lot of work ahead of us in terms of implementation. Mr. Woodworth, I want to ask you about the Beyond Visual Line of Sight rules, or BVLOS rule, for unmanned aerial aircraft systems. As you know, Section 930 of the FAA Reauthorization Act directed the FAA to publish a notice of proposed rulemaking on BVLOS by September 16th, 2024. Unfortunately, nearly 2 months past that deadline, we still have no notice of proposed rulemaking. Can you talk about the importance of getting this NPRM out as soon as possible?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think it's critically important, namely because of the progress that we've experienced over the last year and a half. So a lot of that is still based on exemptions. It's still based on sort of like one-of approvals. It's not sort of it's not a programmatic and rule-based approach. So having a rule would solidify that progress. And I think that the risk that we're facing right now is that we could very easily recede on the gains that have been made over the last year and a half. We can't comment on a rule until the rule is out. We don't know what the rule will look like. We don't know if it maps to sort of the guidance that you all put into the Reauthorization Act. And so the sort of critical next step in rulemaking is to see that in the Federal Register so that we can continue to move forward as an industry.
Thank you for that answer, and I really do hope that the FAA and the Department of Transportation can act very soon to give you the certainty that you need and deserve. Mr. Woodward, sticking with you, if Wing wants to enter a new market, do you have to conduct a new environmental assessment? Is that correct?
At the moment, yes. This has been one of the sort of longest lead and most unpredictable items that we have in our plans to continue operational scale. When we first started, it was literally if you were in one parking lot and you wanted to move across the street to another parking lot, you had to re-go through the process, and that could be 6, 9, 12 months, very unpredictable. We've seen progress on that. The FAA did that for all of the DFW area. So the whole Metroplex as one assessment, and then they've done one for all of North Carolina. So I think the sort of next logical step in that would be to do a nationwide approach. All of these assessments are coming back with sort of no substantial findings. So I think it would be pragmatic to move forward with a national approach.
And very briefly, every time you do one of these environmental assessments, roughly how much does that cost?
I do not have the sort of dollar figures available, but it is a significant time investment, and it provides a significant amount of uncertainty in our plans to expand.
Thank you. And switching gears with the time I have left to Mr. Bunce, I appreciated your testimony highlighting how technology can improve the aviation sector. There's a new pilot program for the mobility of clearances, which I advocated for, along with several of my colleagues on this committee. Can you talk about how this pilot program, mobile clearance delivery, will advance in technology and how the FAA is doing in terms of implementation so far?
Yes, sir. When we try to take off in congested airspace, what we call either Class B or Class C airspace, if you need to get a clearance to be able to enter into that airspace. So what you do now is you either use the radios, but think about an advanced air mobility aircraft that's not in the line of sight for the radio. So they're going to have to call on the phone, talk to the controller. The controller then tells them, you can launch and here's your launch window. It's generally about 2 minutes, and you have to be airborne during that time. So think about how inefficient that is, and if the controller's busy, that aircraft may be sitting there waiting to take off for a long period of time versus an electronic signal that's just, they can look on their mobile devices and be able to say, okay, here is your takeoff clearance, here is your time. It's going to expedite this tremendously. We're trying to push the FAA and the Air Traffic Control Organization to tell us where we're going to put those 5 test sites, and we definitely want to have input into where we are going to operate to start this process with advanced air mobility.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'm going to yield my time to Mr. Johnson of Georgia.
I thank the ranking member of the full committee, and I want to thank Chairman Garrett and also Ranking Member Cohen for convening this important hearing. I also extend my gratitude to the gentleman on the panel for your very wise testimony today. One of my proudest moments of the 118th Congress was the passage of the bipartisan, bicameral Federal Aviation Administration Reauthorization Act of 2024. This monumental achievement reaffirms the United States as a global leader in the aviation industry. This is just the beginning. Our task now is to ensure that the policies we've fought for are executed with urgency and precision. The stakes are too high because more than 20,000 airports and over 1 million aviation workers across the United States depend on us. Airports like Hartsfield-Jackson, Atlanta International Airport in Georgia, one of the busiest in the country, are waiting for these changes to enhance safety, efficiency, and the passenger experience for millions every day. We owe it to every worker in this industry and every passenger flying our skies to ensure that these reforms are not just promised, but delivered. I'm proud to have worked on this law, and I look forward to collaborating with my colleagues, stakeholders, and the entire aviation community to ensure its successful implementation. Mr. Terrari, The 2024 FAA Reauthorization Act directs the FAA and the Department of Energy to lead research and development for the safe use of hydrogen in civil aviation. This involves creating a strategy for hydrogen-powered aircraft, developing certification standards, and coordinating with various stakeholders. The goal is to ensure general aviation aircraft can transition away from leaded fuels by 2030. How can airports collaborate with the FAA in shaping these standards to ensure smooth implementation of hydrogen propulsion in aviation?
Thank you for the question. From an airport perspective, I think the question could probably be answered better by a colleague on the over general aviation. But real briefly from the airport perspective, once it is certified, once it is allowed in aircraft, that's when the airport would have to deal with storing it at the airport or having it on site. But other than the implementation and certification, that's not something that the airport would really be involved in.
All right, thank you. Mr. Bunce, would you care to respond?
Yes, sir. One of our advanced air mobility companies have just demonstrated using liquid hydrogen, which you have to cool. You know, it comes in a liquid form, but they put basically a pod underneath the vehicle, and they extended the range tremendously. Now, we don't have the infrastructure to deliver that to all the airports, but virtually all of our companies are looking at the potential for hydrogen, whether you go and you convert that hydrogen through a fuel cell to electricity to operate electric motors, or you actually burn that hydrogen up at altitude like you would a petroleum-based fuel. So there is tremendous potential there. There's also a lot of technical challenges of being able to cool it to a level that you can keep it in that liquid form because it boils off. So, but we've done it before, and we're very excited about the potential of the technology.
Thank you. Mr. Reagan, mental health is often stigmatized in high-stress professions like aviation. The 2024 FAA Reauthorization Act acknowledges the importance of mental health, mandating the FAA to update its aeromedical protocols and establish a mental health task group to support aviation professionals. What steps do you think the FAA and aviation companies should take to reduce the stigma and encourage aviation workers to seek mental health support without fear of judgment or negative repercussions?
I appreciate the question. I think it starts really with ensuring that we treat it like an illness, like we do with any other condition that a pilot or a flight attendant or an air traffic controller would face. We need to be able to ensure that workers don't have to worry about losing their jobs, losing their pay, losing their livelihoods and careers because they're suffering from an illness. And that right there, that assurance that they're going to be able to seek treatment and move on with their lives and continue their careers it's a really important component. Otherwise, if you've got that hanging over your head that you might have to find a new line of work if I seek the treatment that I know I need, you're not going to be able to get the right types of treatment for the people who need it moving forward.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Molinaro for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I, too, first want to extend my appreciation to Subcommittee Chair Garrett Graves. I find it much easier to compliment him now in his absence. But I wish to truly express my genuine appreciation for his leadership. I'm truly grateful for his friendship, and frankly, America's better because Garrett Graves has served this Congress and his community and district. Mr. Reagan, I want to start with you, if you don't mind. As you know, despite having the same certifications as U.S. facilities, federal regulations have allowed foreign repair facilities to operate on lower safety standards, which, of course, as we know, has incentivized offshoring airline maintenance jobs. Thankfully, Section 302, which we were successful in including the FAA reauthorization, begins to remedy those regulatory discrepancies by now requiring the FAA to issue a long overdue final rule mandating the alcohol and drug testing of workers who maintain Part 121 aircraft at foreign repair stations within 18 months of enactment. This rule was first mandated in the FAA reauthorization of 2012. Late last year, the Biden administration issued a notice of proposed rulemaking. However, as you know, as of December 10th, 2024 final rule has yet to be issued. In addition to requiring the FAA to conduct unannounced annual inspections of foreign facilities, Section 302 requires setting minimum qualifications for mechanics at these facilities within 18 months of enactment, as well as mandates a rulemaking requiring a security threat assessment of these workers. Could you speak with some detail as to the importance of finally leveling this playing field and the inclusion of Section 302 and FAA reauthorization?
Yes, and thank you, most importantly, for your leadership on this issue. You've been in your time here, have been a real advocate on behalf of increasing our standards for anybody who is doing work on U.S. aircraft. And if you look at just the standards that are required for domestic aircraft maintenance professionals, I mean, you have background checks, drug and alcohol testing, there's higher training standards, certification standards across the board. And we implemented those because they make the system safer. And yet, with the hundreds of foreign repair stations across the country who work on U.S. aircraft, who get an FAA certification in order to do that work on U.S. aircraft, the standards are just far, far below. And that, to me, has always been perplexing. Why would we accept a different standard somewhere else when they're doing the same type of work and they're carrying the same U.S. passengers on our aircraft, and the safety should be the same, held to the same standard? In addition, it's a jobs issue. I mean, we have 20,000 fewer mechanics in the U.S. than we did in 2000. It's clear that this is a way to save costs. We should not be sacrificing safety at the same time, and that's currently where we're at.
Thank you, Mr. Regan, and obviously agree and appreciate working with you and your members. Mr. Terreri, first, thank you for your leadership of an important airport in upstate New York. In fact, I'll be flying into Syracuse myself, but wanted I only have a minute and a half, wanted to get to at least one point. As you know, airlines, of course, have reduced service at many of the smaller airports, certainly throughout upstate New York, leaving many of our shared constituents in areas like Binghamton, Ithaca, and Columbia County, and of course, even in Syracuse, without convenience and convenient access. Advanced air mobility certainly can play a role in solving this problem, filling those regional gaps. And I know that Syracuse is on the cutting edge of this issue. With major investment coming your way, the demand is going to grow. Your testimony mentions that the 2024 FAA reauthorization didn't include some of the more robust regulatory and statutory provisions needed to advance AAM. And so based on your experience, can you talk briefly about what is needed from the FAA and Congress to fully enable AAM advancement?
Yep, and thank you for the question. I think a focus on first getting the aircraft certified, right? Getting them flying. And then having the standards to integrate them into the airspace. And as you look at what these vehicles are capable of doing today, the short distances it flies, advanced air mobility is a real solution to connect disconnected communities who have lost their air service. So a focus on advancing that technology will help increase and speed up those communities that are losing their air service. Aircraft are getting larger, so those communities are not going to be having as much service. Advanced air mobility is something that can solve that.
I was very grateful to have a provision added to FAA reauthorization that does, in fact, expand the capacity to dedicate federal resources to airports to expand AAM, VTOL, and eVTOL, and frankly, look forward to the advancement and hopeful in the next administration a more streamlined and efficient process to expand the innovation. So thanks very much. Thank you. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Molinaro. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Indiana, Mr.
Thank you,
Garcia.
Chair and fellow Hoosier and friend. This question is for Mr. Regan. I was very pleased to see your written testimony note that over a year ago, the FAA announced that they were starting the implementation of secondary cockpit barriers on new passenger aircraft. This is the requirement, as you know, sir, that I authored in the FAA Reauthorization Act in 2018. Labor groups have been some of the strongest advocates for these safety devices to keep the flight deck secure and to keep crew and passengers safe. Yet, implementation has been painfully slow. In fact, some suggest deliberately delayed by the industry. What is your assessment, sir, of implementation progress so far? And can you give us an idea of the percentage of implementation at this point? And what can our committee do to basically speed things up and get secondary cockpit barriers installed on all new aircraft?
Thank you for the question. There, you're right, this has been way too slow on the implementation of the secondary barrier requirements. I mean, we're talking about the very last of the 9/11 Commission report requirements to be implemented by Congress. And yet, when we passed that law in 2018, despite the very clear language about any newly manufactured aircraft should be equipped with secondary barriers, there was a whole bunch of hemming and hawing over what is a newly manufactured aircraft. Is it a new model? Is it just literally something coming off the line? I thought Congress was pretty clear. It's every newly manufactured aircraft. It doesn't matter if it's a new model. That should be implemented fully. And furthermore, I mean, the standard should be extended also to cargo aircraft as well, which is also a threat in that regard. I can't give you an exact percentage in terms of the amount that's been done, but I do think in terms of retrofitting and the work that was done in this legislation will strengthen that federal requirement. But I do think it's incumbent upon Congress to hold them accountable to actually see through the letter of the law in terms of why this critical security measure is necessary.
Thank you, sir. And this question is for everyone, this follow-up question. When air traffic controllers, safety inspectors, and transportation workers, we all know, perform amazing jobs. Often so in very challenging circumstances, in the towers, on the ground, and certainly in flight. So first, I want to say thank you for your hard work and keeping our American skies the safest in the world, quite frankly, the best in the world. What are the most important provisions in the FAA bill, in your mind, that will be the most helpful to these workers and to keep our flights running very safely and on time? And lastly, is there one thing that's not in our bill that you believe should have been included?
All right, I'll go ahead and start. From the airport perspective, the increase in funding in AIP, it allows us to increase critical infrastructure, it allows us to address safety issues at the airports, whether it be runway incursion construction, right? Whether it's any other kind of surface transportation, any kind of other surface infrastructure development. So having that additional funding for us is what we see as making the airport environment more safe.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, it's getting a BVLOS rule out and published and sort of enacted to help sort of advance the integration of new entrants into the airspace and provide a framework from which we can keep growing.
I think, Mr. Carson, from my perspective, on a lot of the advisory committees that actually look at the NASAs, not only in this reauthorization, but in previous ones, there's been an ask from the Congress to give us a plan of how to optimize the facilities and take a close look at it. Of course, the fear is that any time that the FAA or DOT would come forward, don't do it in my district, don't do it in my state. And so there isn't really a mechanism by which the executive branch can actually try to execute and think they could ever get it through the legislative branch. And so if I would say anything, it is that we all work together to figure out in this modern day of telecommunications, how many real centers do we need? How many TRACONs? Where can we spend the money? But also, where can we build the one of this century, wherever it is, to say, let's capture the way we now communicate digitally and be able then to say, okay, based on that, how many do we really need and how many TRACONs? And I think that would help the FAA and DOT actually provide a plan forward.
Well, first of all, in terms of things that need to be implemented, I mean, the drug and alcohol testing for foreign repair station workers, I mean, that's an issue. Oversight of foreign repair stations, something I've been working on for the entirety of my 13 years at TTD. It would be nice to be able to move that off the list if we get a good, solid final rule that enhances safety of our system. But we also need to have a federal workforce, including controllers and safety inspectors, that meet the growing demands of our system. So meeting our minimum hiring standards, the newly minted hiring standards for controllers, is a really important priority, and one that will actually improve the efficiency and effectiveness of our national system. In terms of things that were not included that I would like to include, stronger standards for the contract workers. We are an industry that prides itself on being a bastion of middle-class jobs, whether you're, if you're a pilot or a flight attendant or a controller or a ramp worker and you're protected by a union, you're going to be able to make a real, raise a family and have a solid job that way. The workers that often get forgotten are those who are subcontracted out, whether it be the people making the food that's served on board aircraft, whether it be people cleaning the airports, or whether it be the people doing ADA compliance. Those workers need to have a higher standard for how they're performing in the industry, and an industry that rightfully prides itself on providing middle-class jobs.
Thank you. I'll yield back, Chairman.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Van Drew for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me start by saying a few words about Garrett Graves. It's been an honor to serve alongside him. He's a good man. He's smart. He's focused. He's energetic. He cares about what he does, and we will miss him. And I want him to know as he looks over these videos of this hearing that we do appreciate him, that I wish him the very best, and that he has a great future. He's got a lot of good things he's going to do. You know, what I'm going to speak about today is not what I thought I was going to speak about a week or 2 weeks ago. And I'm going to be very blunt. We have a serious problem with our airspace. The recent sightings of unidentified drones in the state of New Jersey, my home state, is justifiably causing tremendous public concern. These drones are large, they're sophisticated, we don't know for sure who's controlling them, and the FAA's current capabilities cannot even locate them on radar. We have a hole in our monitoring systems, and we have a hole in our radar currently. And the truth is, whether people want to hear it or not, we are vulnerable. Our government has failed to effectively regulate our drone industry, and this is not an isolated incident or an isolated phenomenon. Unidentified drones are running across the country. And let me be blunt, and again, say it how it is. Foreign drone technology, particularly China, is a full decade, 10 years ahead of where we are. That is unacceptable in America. We are number one. We've always been number one, but we're not now. And they can take, and they intend to take, full advantage of our vulnerabilities. I've learned, for real, that there is circumstantial evidence that there's an Iranian mothership off the east coast of the United States, and that's launching these drone incursions. They are from high, good sources, individuals who are reputable, individuals who speak with authority, unfortunately are concerned with identifying who they are at this point who are saying this. But this is true. It's unacceptable, and it's frightening, and our government has to act. And I say this not only as a member of Congress from the state of New Jersey, but I say this as someone who loves America like we all do who are in this room. We must build a national drone infrastructure. We must control our airspace, and we must protect the American people. The unfortunate reality is that this current administration has allowed our nation to fall behind the rest of the world, and that is unacceptable. This Congress passed the FAA Reauthorization to promote a strong and regulated drone industry. The bill included a mandate. We worked on this bill, my office, as did other offices. We did a lot on it. Include a mandate for the FAA to develop rules, and you all know what this means, for beyond visual line of sight operations. It's a critical capability for the drone industry that we need to have, but it's only one of the many steps that we must take. We are already years behind the rule. The reauthorization unequivocally directed the FAA to advance the rule-making process. We gave them, as some of you know, and this committee knows, until September 16th, which is now 3 long months ago. But President Biden's Office of Management has again delayed its release. Frankly, this is not the only area of technology that we've heard this about. They've failed to move from 5G to key safety technologies. Our nation's innovation is being hampered by big, burgeoning, non-functional bureaucracy. We need a real cultural transformation at the FAA and our government as a whole to come to a reality in dealing with this technology. We need an organizational structure at the FAA that is bold, an organizational structure that's ambitious, and advancing our American technology so that we are number one. So I'd like to submit for the record a statement from Robert Rose, co-founder and CEO of Reliable Robotics. Chairman, I'd like to submit this for the record. They are an advanced aviation safety technology company that has endorsed the proposals I've put forward to reform the FAA. This committee must work with our new president, President Trump, to make the United States of America the most dominant drone power in the world. We lead, we don't follow. That's America. This is about our safety. It's about our national security. It's about our future as a nation. The United States of America, the greatest country on the face of the earth. It is real, and we have to get on the stick. We have to do what's right. So there isn't a few seconds left. Well, I thank you. I gave you my speech. I know some of you know, and I've spoken to before, this is a big deal. This is a real big deal. It's happening right now in my state as we speak, and it's a serious threat, whether anybody wants to admit it or not. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Without objection, so ordered. I now recognize Mr. Garcia for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I too want to express my gratitude to Garrett Graves for all of his contributions and, of course, his role in shepherding the legislation that we're discussing today forward. And, of course, I'm glad to see that the FAA bill contained a workforce development programs component to it to include aviation manufacturing. Pursuing a wider pool of talent is necessary if we're to indeed move workforce needed to support increased travel demand in the coming years. I'd like to begin by thanking the witnesses here today and begin my questioning. Mr. Boons, recognizing that the Workforce Development Program is awaiting funding, can you describe what the recruitment of aviation manufacturing workers and aerospace engineers looks like right now, and why funding the federal aviation workforce development programs is so important?
Sir, when we go and talk to parents and that, think about when we fly today. Very few people even look out the window. So that luster that we used to have in aviation, it has been tarnished just because it's ubiquitous. We do it all the time. So what we have found is one of the things that you have helped us with, this committee, is talking about this is probably the most exciting time in aerospace since the dawn of the jet age, because we're going to unmanned systems, to be able to deliver medicine all over the world, to be able to go and have electric aviation, which, think about it, service to rural communities in that, and that we have the luxury of having a network of 5,000 public use airports that ring around our cities, but also in all of rural America. No other nation on the planet has this. And so by having these grants and to be able to go and show young people that work, if you go into any of our factories, especially the AAM companies right now, you will see young men and women, and I'm very proud of the fact that we have more and more women entering into aviation, which has been a very male-dominated profession up to this point. But it's just fascinating, and these types of grants will help us share that word not only to high schools and middle schools, but also in those tech centers, but also allowing folks to take advantage of the great programs like NASA has for scholarships for engineers that supply both government and industry. So this is so important, and we really need the funding out of the appropriations committees to be able to go and actualize this program.
Thank you for that. I strongly believe that the aviation workforce should reflect the diversity of the country, and that the Workforce Development Program works toward that. Fully funding the Willa Brown Aviation education programs, which provides educational support opportunities in underrepresented communities, would also help. Next, I'd like to focus on the workers who make the flying experience possible. Mr. Reagan, as you pointed out in your testimony, airport ramp workers are faced with numerous hazards in their day-to-day. FAA is currently reviewing ramp worker safety with the goal of submitting a report to Congress next year with recommendations. Mr. Reagan, why would addressing gaps in training and risks on the ramp help improve the safety and well-being of workers?
Thank you for the question. Frankly, it cannot be overstated how important having the proper safety and training for these workers is. We've seen the consequences of when things don't go well, and they're fatal. And we've had a number of workers who have unfortunately lost their lives at their workplaces, and that should never be an acceptable outcome for in our country and for our government, that we have people who are dying while doing their jobs. And so I think having the proper recommendations will be important, but then again, I think we also need Congress to continue to hold them accountable. And too often we end up waiting for the big authorization years to attack problems, to address problems. And when we do have the proper feedback from the FAA on how to improve this system, Congress needs to be prepared to act right away and not wait for the next big bill, the next Christmas tree to try to move forward. I think it's incumbent to act on the best information we have as it comes in.
Thank you for that. Ramp workers play a critical role in guiding aircraft to and from their gates, loading and unloading luggage, amongst other duties. My Good Jobs for Good Airports bill would have ensured minimum wage and benefits for ramp workers and other service workers, but I look forward to working with you in the next coming Congress and thereafter to improve the situation. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. If I could ask Mr. Woodworth, as you know, the UAV industry is new. There are challenges that are emerging. Of course, when a new industry is operating in a new regulatory climate, what do you see the future of UAVs? What do you see that industry looking like 20 years from now?
Yeah, I think that one of the largest misconceptions about our industry is that it is this thing that is sort of super far off in the future. And I think that the reality, both for UAS and companies in UAM, is that that technology is ready today, and sort of large elements of that future are here right now. I think for us, we're focused on primarily package delivery as our use case. And what that really means is, right now today you have multi-thousand-pound vehicles driving around small boxes, carrying people's meals, things like that. And it makes much more sense, both for our infrastructure and for the safety of the general public, to transport those goods by a smaller, more efficient means. So my and our view of the future is that you have a robust UAS ecosystem within the United States. You have operations happening all across the nation around the clock. And that those operations are having a real meaningful impact on the citizens of the U.S.
So working backwards from that vision, certainly the regulatory climate right now was not crafted with UAV operations in mind. What recommendations, I read your testimony, but what specific recommendations do you have that would improve the structure, the framework that currently exists to allow it to be more robust?
Yeah, I think a big element of that hinges on what is in the BVLOS rule. For example, things that have been challenging to us over the last several years are the topic of type certification, the topic of environmental impact assessments, a lot of things that are very much sort of like square peg round hole problems for us, where we're trying to fit into a set of aviation regulations that were built for, aircraft that weigh many tens of thousands of pounds, and we're carrying around dozens or hundreds of people. I think that if key elements of the BVLOS rule focus on solidifying the gains that have happened over the last year and a half or so, and making those truly programmatic and truly rule-based, so that we can continue to sort of build on the progress that's been made so far.
So I think the big challenge certainly is that you're going to see very dynamic advancements over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And you'll have new platforms, and you have new. So how do we get beyond just having to do a review every single time there's a new technology or a new platform? What advice do you have for Congress?
Yeah, I think a big element, which I think was in the Reauthorization Act and has been in the dialogues over the last year and a half, has been making things performance-based. So focusing on sort of the true risk assessment of the systems that you're operating, the true types of operations that they're performing, and then making sure that the regulatory framework around that can support a whole bunch of different solutions. So if you go out to an airport today, you look around the ramp, there's all sorts of different airplanes. And those airplanes are built for different use cases, but they all operate within the same framework. And so I think that for emerging technologies to take a similar approach where you focus on the outcome that you're trying to get to rather than a super prescriptive method of getting there.
And do you think that culture, that mentality exists at the FAA right now? Do you think that we are moving toward a performance-based approach, or do you think there's still challenges that we need to work through?
I believe that we are moving towards that approach, but there's always the risk of sort of one step forward, one step back, one step to the side. I think that the rulemaking is an approach to solidify those perspectives and take it so that it can be applied for the years to come.
So let me ask then a broad question with just what you've outlined. I mean, what should this committee, what should Congress be working on the year ahead to support the efforts? I know Mr. Van Drew mentioned of having our country be more dominant in the UAV, UAS space.
Yeah, I think it really is making sure that rulemaking happens, making sure that it aligns with the intents that were written into the bill, and being willing to change it if it does not. I think that the reason that growth has been slower in the United States is because of the uncertainty of how long will it take to expand. Is there a process that, if I go through the whole process at the end of it, will it still be the same checklist that I started with? Having predictability in the process is what fosters growth.
Certainly appreciate your testimony and your guidance and insight here. I now recognize Representative Skolton for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our distinguished witnesses for being here today. And I would be remiss if I didn't join the chorus of my colleagues in expressing appreciation for Chair Garrett Graves and his leadership on the Aviation Subcommittee. Though he is not here at this moment, I just want to put into the record that he's brought tremendous wisdom to this committee and our country. So thank you immensely. The FAA owns and operates air traffic control towers in airports across the country. Of course, this includes the federally operated air traffic control tower at the Gerald R. Ford International Airport in my district, our pride and joy. I'm sure it's no surprise to anyone on this committee that I'm bringing up our ATC. At 60 years old, GRR's air traffic control tower is the oldest among the top 75 busiest airports. However, the FAA has yet to provide a timeline for when GRR's air traffic control tower will be replaced, despite the fact that it has been identified as a top 2 priority and the design phase is now complete. This project is critical to ensuring that consumers have smooth and safe travel experience while boosting Grand Rapids' local economy. That's why I'm so proud to have championed 2 provisions in the FAA Reauthorization to ensure the transparent selection of air traffic control towers for replacement, as well as proper consideration of small hub air traffic control towers above a certain age when making these determinations. Mr. Terrieri, how will these provisions provide clarity to ensure the FAA's delays in air traffic control tower replacements do not hinder airports' plans to expand their operations and services for consumers?
Well, thank you for the question. As far as impacting airports, I think as airports look at their long-term development plans, a lot of times the control tower might be in a location that's not that impedes future development. So having clarity on a timeline allows you in that master planning program to time when you're building additional terminals, moving the tower, and sometimes having to raise the tower so that you have line of sight on all the new development and infrastructure that you've put in place. So having that timeline would be really helpful as we look to continue developing our airports.
Great, thank you. In addition to providing insight into air traffic control tower replacements, the 2024 FAA Reauthorization established $350 million in a reimbursement program for airports to replace PFAS firefighting foam and equipment. This is also critically important to my district as we've been impacted by PFAS contamination at the airport and communities surrounding it. These federal funds are particularly important in my community, not only because of the impact, but because of our location to the Great Lakes and the Grand River. Together, they form one of the largest freshwater estuaries in the entire world. Again, to you, Mr. Terry, does this provision go far enough to support airports transitioning to PFAS-free firefighting foams to protect our environment and public health? And if not, how else can Congress further support PFAS removal from airports as well as the communities that surround them?
So I think this is a great start to help with that transition. The PFAS foams that we were required to use. It was a requirement for airports, and now having to make that transition, this is helping transition that foam. But then you still have, as you mentioned, some of the mitigation requirements that are going to be coming, right? I think as you look forward, it's kind of really three things I would break it down to. A little bit more communication with the FAA on what's going to be required. Same thing with the trucks and other equipment that are coming on. I think helping get the circle liability protections for airports would be a very big help for us. I think those are probably those are two of the biggest things I think that would really help. But I think what we have right now is a great start, and I think it's going to help us continue to solve this problem. It's an industry problem that we have to address.
Thank you, sir. I yield back.
Thank you. Recognize the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Westman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses. I would be remiss if I didn't get on the Garrett Graves congratulation train. Garrett and I came in together as freshmen, and we served not only on this committee, but also on the Natural Resources Committee together. And I will say nobody commands the facts more than Garrett. I feel like I've learned a lot from being around Garrett, and I appreciate all your hard work and the policies you've moved forward and the debate that you bring to Congress. Will be greatly remiss. Consider you a dear friend and wish you the best. Mr. Terry, in the FAA Reauthorization bill we enacted earlier this year, Congress directed the FAA to restore the waterfall for Terminal Flight Data Manager to not less than 89 airports. The FAA had previously reduced that waterfall from 89 to 49 airports, removing the Syracuse Airport, as well as 2 airports in Little Rock and Fort Smith that serve many of my constituents. Since then, the FAA has not released an updated waterfall of which 40 additional airports will receive this important technology. Can you explain the importance of the FAA moving forward with this directive and how airports benefit from the implementations of technologies like TFDM?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Can you explain the importance of the FAA moving forward with this directive and how airports benefit from the implementation of technologies like TFDM?
Which technologies? I'm sorry.
The terminal flight data managers that they're going to add 40 more. What?
I'm not sure. We can get back to you. I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to.
All right. Well, if you can get back to me, I would appreciate that. And I yield the balance of my time to Mr. Stauber.
Thank you very much. I, too, want to thank Representative Graves for his leadership as he heads out. You have been a great member. Your policy thoughts and ideas are second to none. I'm going to get right to it. You know, general aviation is a cornerstone of the aviation sector. And in Duluth, Minnesota, Cirrus Aircraft has been one of the leaders in personal aviation, providing opportunity in aviation to not only Minnesotans, but people around the world. Mr. Bunce, there's been a lot of focus, and rightfully so, by the incoming administration on rulemaking. Your testimony argues that the FAA's rulemaking is unique as opposed to other agencies, especially in terms of enabling innovation and industry competitiveness. Can you elaborate on why this is the case?
Yes, Mr. Stauber, let's take Cirrus, for instance. We are going to have to do rulemaking in the next few years just as we work to eliminate the lead in the avgas. Mm-hmm. So if we go with a system that says you got to get rid of a certain number of rules before you can promulgate one, it's very hard for DOT or the FAA to determine which rules to get rid of because they're all enabling regulations for aviation. So we are very unique in that class, and it actually goes beyond just the rules itself. It goes to policy and guidance. So there was a time back a couple administrations ago where they actually had in DOT what was called a rule of rules and guidance on guidance, which just bogged down the whole system. And so we really need this committee's help to emphasize to the new administration that aviation is unique in that way, and we need to be able to keep promulgating rules to keep pace with how fast technology is advancing.
My second question, you just answered, which was going to be, what direction should Congress and the administration take in this critical area so that manufacturers like Cirrus Aircraft can continue to provide opportunities in general aviation?
Absolutely, and you know, you think about Cirrus is one of the aircraft, both in the jet that they produce and the piston aircraft that have a parachute in it. That technology is just one of many technologies that we are promulgating. It's now in the jet has a button that if the pilot, something happens physiologically to the pilot, a passenger can push the button and that aircraft will land itself. And it tells air traffic control what's going on. Yeah. The controllers know it's an emergency. It gives messages to the folks that are in the aircraft, don't worry, we got it under control. And I've actually flown that aircraft, been able to push that button. It's incredible technology. Yeah. And that is the cornerstone to what we're gonna do with automation, because we are gonna make flying in this nation, we're gonna lead the world in being able to automate in a very safe process, small aircraft to start with, and it'll build up. And it's just like, you know, 20 years from now, it's going to be, we don't have elevator operators anymore in smaller aircraft. We probably will not have pilots, and it'll be done in an extremely safe and predictable manner.
Thank you. I'd like to use the remainder of my time to briefly highlight the Duluth International Airport. Duluth provides vital service to our region in the Northland. Commercial, cargo, and medical service flights are utilize the airport. It is home to the previously mentioned Cirrus aircraft and the 148th Fighter Wing of the Minnesota Air National Guard, the F-16 unit, making the airport crucial to our economic and our national security. And the airport supports over 6,000 jobs and contributes roughly $760 million annually to our economy. However, the Duluth Air Traffic Control Tower is currently deteriorating. The existing tower is 70 years old. It's the third oldest air traffic control tower in the country. And it is my hope that the FAA and the next administration make investment into this tower a top priority so Duluth can sustain air commerce in the region and economic vitality in northern Minnesota and throughout our entire state. In addition, that air traffic control tower will give us the opportunity to get that next-gen aircraft to the 148th Fighter Wing. Those men and women are the best of the best. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Stauber. Look, before I get started on questions, I'm going to recognize myself for 5 minutes, but I do want to also thank some of the people in our team that have been amazing over the years in this committee. One person that I didn't mention earlier is Maggie Airy, our Deputy Chief of Staff, who's run most of the portfolio, policy portfolio for this committee in our office. And Maggie, I want to thank you very much. In addition to leading our Washington team, she has had 2 kids and juggled all kinds of things. Maggie couldn't have done it without you. Thank you very, very much. And really appreciate the friendship, partnership. You've been awesome. So thanks. I also want to thank Paul Sawyer, our Chief of Staff, and all the folks in the team that have worked on our transportation portfolio. Truly a team. We have a great group of folks and couldn't have done it without them. Mr. Terry, I want to ask you a quick question. You mentioned earlier the lack of certainty moving forward. Could you just very briefly describe why certainty is so important to you and to the airports in terms of regulatory certainty, numbers, and things like that as you move forward?
So are you referencing what we talked about, the control towers?
For example, AIP numbers and things like that, just giving you regulatory certainty and helping you understand.
Oh, the funding, absolutely.
Funding numbers,
yes.
And things
so,
like that.
So right now, as we're going through and programming our 3 5-year capital plans, and you have to prioritize your projects, whether it's by safety, and there's the qualifiers that we have to use. Not knowing how much funding we have or going to have available really limits our ability to lay out that framework of how are you going to develop the airport. And in addition to that, what are you actually able to afford? Because sometimes some of the larger projects you may not be able to afford, so you go and you break that into some smaller projects. So having that clear look ahead of what we know will be coming really does help us plan for the future.
Thank you. Mr. Woodworth, last time you were here, 2023, last year, I think things look fundamentally different now than they did then. For example, FAA approving your approach to detect and avoid and sort of how you approach beef loss, particularly in the DFW area. Can you talk a little bit about how that certainty has affected you and perhaps even investment decisions in the United States?
Yes, I think it follows a lot of what Mr. Terreri was saying. We're a business. We have to make plans about sort of where we're going to invest our resources. And there's a significant opportunity cost that comes with uncertainty. Like if I can't plan out where I'll be able to grow, what new locations I'll be able to go to, it provides an immense amount of unpredictability that sort of limits those resources. I think that the last year and a half has been a great success story for the United States. When I was here last time, the vast majority of our operations were happening not in the United States. And today, the vast majority of our operations are happening in the United States. And they're growing at not a incremental level. I think that that's the other big step. Whenever you get into a process where the next steps takes sort of less energy than the previous one, you know that you're on a path forward.
So if I can paraphrase, certainty, predictability, and efficiency attracts investment, and the opposite repels it to other countries. Is that fair?
100%.
Yeah, thank you very much. And one other thing in that regard is the NEPA process. Once again, certainty, predictability, and efficiency. Could you talk about briefly some of the scenarios you've seen in regard to NEPA and how that may challenge some of your operations?
Yes, when we first started, everything was done on a site-by-site basis. So if you wanted to be at one store and you wanted to go across the street to another store, you had to redo the process. That could be 6, 9, 12 months or more, with a large unpredictability in when that would come. That makes planning expansion very difficult. We've seen approaches become more pragmatic, first by going to across all of DFW, and then North Carolina just recently did one for the whole state. I think that we are at the point now where all of these have come back with sort of no substantive finding. Like we could do one for the whole United States. I think that would be a logical next step.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Colonel, I want to ask you, you made mention earlier about concern about the 2-to-1. I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit more, meaning 2-to-1 on regulations. I wanted to talk a little bit more. Look, I'm an awful bureaucrat. I can't stand red tape. I like to move forward. I like to do things, build things, and make decisions. But in the case, for example, with the powered lift rule, can you talk a little bit about how the right regulations provide certainty as opposed to, sort of creating this uncertainty and what that does for your members?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Again, we could not even begin to operate these advanced air mobility vehicles without an operational rule because we created what's called a powered lift category. We used to have a category just called airplanes, fixed wing, helicopters, but we had nothing in powered lift, and the FAA decided to go down the powered lift route without an operational rule. So we had to do it. But what was key is, and this applies very closely to BVLOS and how we want to advocate for being able to get this NPRM out, because once they promulgate the notice of proposed rulemaking and allow industry to comment it, heretofore, until this committee put pressure on them, they'd go into ex parte and they say, okay, you can't engage industry anymore. And we go, well, wait, other federal agencies don't do it that way. And oh, by the way, don't you want us to talk about the comments that we made so that we can perfect it? And the proof was when the SFAR was released a couple months ago, industry really had a positive reaction to it. And we're hoping now, if they get the BVLOS SFAR out, industry can comment, but then they allow us, all they've got to do is docket it, and they can say, we had consultation with industry and we tried to improve upon it. And that's, you all have helped us improve this process.
Hey, Colonel, thank you. And I just want to be clear. So that certainty or predictability helps to foster investment, similar to what Mr. Woodworth said. It gives you clarity. So with that, I want to thank very much my friend, Mr. Carbajal, for indulging us here. And I think just a few of you left. Whoever's taking over the chair, we owe you all about 3 minutes. I'm not kidding. So feel free to be a little more liberal. And with that, recognize Mr. Carbajal.
Thank you, Ms. Graves. First of all, before you leave, I just want to say thank you for your service. It's been a real pleasure working with you. I appreciated the common ground we oftentimes found, and I appreciated also jousting with you when I disagreed with you. So good luck, and thank you for your service. Mr. Terreri, I was successful in including 2 of my bills aimed at dealing with PFAS pollution at the airports in the FAA reauthorization that was signed into law. My PFAS Act establishes a $350 million reimbursement program for airport sponsors to replace PFAS firefighting foam and equipment. And my SOAR Act, which would require periodic reporting from the FAA on the transition plan to move away from PFAS. We know PFAS is harmful to public health, and we need to move away from it. I was glad to have my colleagues, Representative Van Orden and Representative Lawler, help me push for these bipartisan provisions. Can you tell us how airports are working with the FAA and Congress to ensure these provisions are appropriately implemented?
Yes, so we are in communication with the FAA on what is that process going to look like. What is the transition? How is it going to impact the equipment? And so we've been having a lot of open dialogue. I think making sure that communication continues is going to be paramount to make sure that this is a smooth transition from the former AFFF to the new F3.
Thank you. Mr. Bunce and Mr. Terreri, an issue I continuously hear from my constituents deals with airplane noise pollution. My district is home to 3 airports in Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo counties. While these airports are an important piece of our tourism economy, my constituents have raised legitimate issues. Mr. Bunce, can you talk about new entrants and technologies that will help reduce aircraft noise?
Yes, Mr. Carvajal, I mentioned earlier that we have the luxury of having this incredible network of 5,000 public use airports around the country. And if you just look at the distance between Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo, you end up having, I think, 4 airports. I looked on ForeFlight the other day that we'll be able to operate these aircraft out of. And think about now being able to take people down to LAX or up to SFO for their long-haul flights, and then we take away the amount of traffic that are at those 2 airports. But with that, in addition to that, our engine companies are doing some great work in being able to look at the nacelle, which is the structure that surrounds the engine, reforming it to reduce the noise signature, but also then looking at what's called open rotor technology, where you actually free the blades out that reduces noise too. So whether it's Rolls, GE, Pratt & Whitney, Williams, all these companies are really focusing on reducing that noise signature. So I think as we embrace this technology of advanced air mobility, we're also going to, traditional aviation will be able to make some pretty neat improvements in noise mitigation in the years ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Terreri, how are airports working with their local communities on mitigation projects and new flight paths?
So the flight paths are with the FAA Air Traffic Control. So and when we get complaints, noise complaints, I'll use Syracuse specifically. When we get noise complaints, we'll work with the local tower to see if there's anything that can be done in terms of aircraft routing. Other things that we can look at doing is using the preferential runways to keeping communities development, working with our local outside the airport zoning boards to make sure that they are not putting new communities in the paths of flights. And so that's some of the stuff that we have done, especially as Syracuse has continued to grow, making sure that everyone understands the airport, the predominant flight paths, and kind of what does that mean for our region.
Thank you. Mr. Bunce, across the manufacturing sector, I understand there are increasing challenges associated with supply chains. The aviation sector is not immune to the difficulties faced in sourcing materials and dealing with constraints. Can you elaborate on some of the challenges general aviation manufacturers are facing today, and any recommendations to promote stability and support competitiveness?
Well, sir, supply chain is just not unique to general aviation. Our commercial aviation brethren and our military are all faced with this dilemma of supply chain. And it really is whack-a-mole these days, because when you think you've got it fixed, I think one of our engine manufacturers mentioned that they had to source over 10,000 different new parts and pieces once the war in Ukraine happened, once the pandemic happened, because a lot of the small mom and pops that were providing parts and pieces, small structures, forgings and castings have gone away. and they just haven't been sustainable, whether it's the workforce has aged out or they're working from home. Manufacturing is really taking a hit that impacts our supply chain. So I'm hoping that we put a focus as a nation on supply chain. We've got to have an independence from some of the vulnerable pieces of the supply chain. We also saw recently China is restricting some of the precious metals that are very important to aerospace, and we're going to have to find different sources for that. But supply chain is critical, and it's got to be an industrial policy for this nation that also helps the federal government to look at supply chain and be able to try to fix this. What we relied on before the pandemic was called just in time. We didn't have to keep large inventories and everything because it was just delivered when we needed it from a global structure. That's gone now, and it's a new paradigm for all of us.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As co-chair of the Quiet Skies Caucus and the member who represents the District of Columbia, which is plagued by airplane and helicopter noise, I'm pleased we were able to get noise provisions included in the FAA Reauthorization of 2024. Under this law, the FAA has a mandate to do more to combat aviation noise and to engage more with affected communities. Mr. Bunce, in your testimony, you mentioned that the General Aviation Manufacturers Association and the companies it represents are developing electric and hybrid propelled vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. Would you describe the impact of this technology could have on reducing aviation noise, particularly for airports, adjacent communities to airports?
Yes, ma'am. As we look to this technology, one of our companies just flew its first production aircraft, and basically it was outfitted the way it's going to be delivered to one of the cargo carriers. And the pilot was up there, and he actually is the owner of the company, and he just said, it's like flying a sailplane, that you can't hear these vehicles. And so if we put it in the context of Washington, D.C. here where we live, we listen to a lot of noise all the time, but these vehicles will be able to disperse the concentration of traffic, take it out to all the airports that ring this city, which will help us. But also, we can't forget about the technology that with new techniques in air traffic control that allow aircraft that are taken off from Reagan, for instance, to climb faster so that it reduces that noise footprint because it has a larger ascent and the noise reduces as it climbs faster. But also, you can power back on your descent if you can get a controlled continuous descent down the landing. And so a lot of this technology is all tied together in being able to reduce noise when we use the airspace efficiently, but also use the network of airports. But you would be amazed if you were able just to see these new types of advanced air mobility aircraft fly, because you're looking at them and you might hear a hum, but it's something that is no more than what we would hear on normal street traffic. It's amazing.
That's excellent. Mr. Reagan, the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024 includes a provision requiring the FAA administrator to implement new flight procedures and establish or modify aircraft arrival and departure routes for the purposes of reducing aviation noise in neighboring communities. Do pilots have sufficient resources and training to safely perform new procedures and fly routes that minimize noise impacts in airports, adjacent communities, and if not, what can Congress do to ensure that pilots have what they need?
Thank you. Our pilots, our country's pilots are certainly, they're the best trained in the world. They are going to be able to handle new procedures that are to address things like air noise pollution. But that's as long as Congress maintains those high standards. And we've seen a lot of efforts over the past, this is my third FAA bill I've done at TTD, and every single one, we've had to fight back against efforts to reduce pilot training and certification standards. And that would be a dangerous and I think short-sighted approach to meeting the newer challenges that are approaching pilots and the aviation system broadly, including reducing noise pollution.
Oh, thank you very much, and I yield back.
Chairman thanks the gentlelady. The chairman now recognizes Representative Mann.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to associate myself with the positive remarks towards outgoing Chairman Graves. He's a good friend, and he will be missed. Thank you all for being here today. I represent the big first district of Kansas. Aviation is a critical industry in the state of Kansas with roughly 100 general aviation airports, several commercial and regional airports, and a huge footprint in aviation and aerospace manufacturing. The FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024 included critical provisions to ensure that our aviation industries are able to improve services, bolster our workforce, and promote American manufacturing innovation. That's why it's crucial that the FAA and DOT waste no time in implementing the provisions set forth in the bill so that the aviation industry can continue to get to work. Just a handful of quick questions. First for you, Mr. Terreri. The Big First, my district has 60 primarily rural counties, and we depend on reliable air services to connect to the rest of the world. Please speak to the importance of certain provisions in reauthorization, like the Airport Improvement Program and new aircraft innovation, that are critical to ensuring that all communities can access air service.
So I think one of the biggest benefits is we've started to really bring forward advanced air mobility, and what you're seeing in where the airlines, and you've seen a reduction in service to smaller communities that used to have air service. Now, using advanced air mobility, that's a feasible business model that can actually work to fill that gap as airlines start to kind of consolidate in. So in this bill, starting to lay the groundwork for advanced air mobility and integrating into airports and into airspace, that's going to be key. And then on the airport side, the additional funding this is going to be a different type of infrastructure. So allowing now to build the proper infrastructure that is needed to support these smaller communities that ultimately need access to the airspace system.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Next question for you, Mr. Bunce. You rightly highlighted the importance of FAA and industry workforce efforts and the correlation between technical expertise and then oversight. As a proponent of the manufacturing workforce program, please elaborate on how this would further innovation, competitiveness, but also safety.
Well, sir, as you know, Kansas is one of our centers of excellence for aviation. It's not lost on anyone. We have the air capital of the world in Wichita, but also throughout the state, we have a tremendous supply base. And the institutions of learning in Kansas have really tried to develop, whether it's up in Salina or Wichita State, Nair, all of these different great places where we're taking young people and training them, but we've got to keep that feedstock going. And I think that's where if we can get the appropriations and the money toward the manufacturing side, it really does help us keep the leadership that we need in the world. The programs that are developed, I'm very familiar with the one in Wichita State, where they're taking young people that are coming out of the military at McConnell Air Force Base and being able then to have an apprentice program with our companies that surround Wichita, and so they're able to make a living while they're going to school, getting their ratings that they need from the FAA to be able to enter and do the manufacturing and maintenance. It's a fantastic program, and it should be a model for what we can do throughout the nation.
I agree. Great for veterans, great for the industry, great for everybody. One last quick question. From an FAA perspective, why are knowledge-sharing opportunities with industry so important? I think we often think about the industry standpoint, but from FAA's perspective, why is that critical?
Sir, I mentioned earlier that we're filling a great pool of experience that left the FAA due to retirement and aging out, or we in industry, we pay them more, we hire them away. And so we've got a bunch of young people in there, and the young people, they're ready to go. They want to learn, they want to apply the skills that they learned in college, but they don't have that ability to draw on the expertise that they used to. And so what we're what we're doing, and the FAA supported us through the help of this committee to be able to go and do these skills enhancement training where we'll take them to our factories and we will have them sit down with the engineers and be able to say, this is how we do it here. Or we host conferences. We at Gamma just hosted a battery conference. We, lithium-ion batteries, we all know about, the potential for thermal runaway and a fire. That's why we have the procedures when we go on the aircraft and that. But there's new ways to be able to mitigate that, and we need to be able to teach new people in the FAA what modern technology allows us to make it very safe that you can fly these in the unmanned vehicles and also in the advanced air mobility vehicles. So this is absolutely critical for this knowledge transfer, that it goes from industry to government, but then also government can say, this is how I will approach regulating this, and it allows us to have that confidence and relationship building back and forth to make the system work.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. The chair now recognizes himself for a period of questioning. Mr. Terreri, I know that you have answered multiple questions on the firefighting foam, but I've got a few more of my own. So I think in your testimony, you referenced the forced transition from aqueous film, forming foam, or the AFFF, to fluorine-free foam, F3, and the desire of airports to receive funding to assist with the costly transition and to avoid circular liability for discharges of firefighting foam that were federally mandated. And so while the EPA has issued an administrative policy that it does not intend to pursue entities like airports, I think it is important that Congress provides certainty to airports that they will not be held liable in these circumstances. As we know, administrations change, viewpoints change. What's not palatable today becomes palatable tomorrow. So, but more importantly, according to the Naval Research Laboratory, AFFF creates both a film and a foam blanket that remains stable longer and is more effective than foams that do not contain the current list of chemicals. In other words, the AFFF is more effective than its alternatives as we currently know them. Other observations from the Naval Research Laboratory are that F3s are less forgiving than AFFF and require more precise application due to the absence of the aqueous film. Fluorine-free films can be optimized using aspirated nozzles that improve the blanketing effect, but this application is difficult around obstacles, like the thing that's on fire, like an airplane with people in it, and across far distances, because heaven knows the first thing we all want to do is run headlong into a fire, right? F3s require a less aggressive application so that the foam does not get mixed into the fuel source and itself burned, which, like, I just kind of think about the implications of that. You're a firefighter, people are trying to get off of a burning airplane, and you're like, got to be careful because the firefighting foam might catch on fire, right? That's kind of mind-blowing, actually. Environmental conditions such as wind. At an airport, right? Windsocks are at airport. We're like, as aviators, the wind is an important factor, ever present, almost always. But the wind may cause holes to open up in the F3 blanket. You can imagine what that creates. And of course, repeat applications or passes may be required to effectively extinguish a fire, which isn't helpful either. So the GAO also identified concerns about the performance of alternative foams in temperature extremes. You know, that burning stuff is hot. You get the plastic seats and the foam, et cetera. I certainly understand the concerns surrounding the potential contamination issues with AFFF. We've been dealing with that here. It is very alarming that we are rushing to a transition at taxpayers' expense without an alternative of comparable performance. I get the concerns, and maybe we should minimize practice and some things like that, or practice with something lesser just for the sake of practice. But just running headlong into a less effective alternative and forcing everybody to pay for it, not providing the liability protection, I think is short-sighted. do you know how the airports plan to address the performance gap, and what would you recommend be done to address the concerns of the flying public that doesn't want to burn alive in an aircraft when this alternative foam is not as effective? It's just not as effective, right? Do you have some recommendations?
Well, I think definitely with the new product, there is training that is taking place. That's what's happening at the FAA Tech Center, along with the ARF working groups, to really understand how this chemical and this component can be used and should be used in its application. It is definitely different than AFFF, but that is something that the industry professionals are all looking at to make sure that in the event that it has to be deployed, it's done in a safe manner to protect anyone who is on that aircraft.
Do you believe we should be forcing the transition until we know what the performance concerns are and what all the potential alternatives might be to be as effective as the current firefighting applications?
Forcing, well, with the FAA having required us
I mean,
to,
you're the kind of the expert here, right? And so your voice matters. And so we're saying, we got this problem over here, we want to fix it, but let's just do whatever we got to do to deal with this problem, which might create a whole other problem, which includes people trying to get off a burning aircraft that can't be put out, because that's where we are. I mean, you got to say it the way it is. So I'm just wondering if you agree with our current approach.
well, I agree that with the testing that is being done on the new product that gets applied to the aircraft, right? That they have process and policy on how it is applied, so that it is a alternative.
Yeah, but we're implementing and forcing the implementation, right? Before the testing is complete. Is that good or not good?
I have to know a little bit more about, and the firefighting foam, I guess the unique differences that you're really speaking to here, because I'm not an ARF expert, I'm not a firefighting and chemical expert on their extinguishing agents.
Okay. All right. Chair, thanks. The gentleman, the chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to our witnesses for being here today. And I want to thank Chairman Sam Graves, Chairman Garrett Graves, Ranking Members Larson and Cohen for their work in passing this critical legislation. I am pleased to work alongside them and all the members of this committee to produce and pass this bipartisan FAA reauthorization. Now this committee faces the critical task of conducting oversight on its implementation. We must ensure that these important mandates addressing safety and passenger experience, spurring innovation and workforce growth, and cementing our commercial and general aviation sector's place as the world's gold standard are realized. Mr. Terreri, as you may know, my district in central and northwest New Jersey has been the epicenter of unexplained drone sightings over the last number of weeks. What advice would you give to the FAA to modernize and to adapt to this emerging technology, particularly with regards to airports and places of interest like stadiums and governmental sites?
Thank you. So Syracuse Airport, we were one of the 5 airports that were selected to be part of the FAA's drone detection mitigation program. And out of that, they tested different technologies that could detect drone activity in and around the airport. One of the things that we have done in Syracuse is we have formed a Center of Excellence for Advanced Air Mobility and have what we call the New Air Alliance, where we actually now have a higher visibility and enhanced visibility on drone activity in and around the airport in Syracuse. We've hosted We've hosted the Department of Homeland Security, the Undersecretary. We've signed an MOA with the Undersecretary to help using our technologies to do drone detection. So there are systems that are out right now that can help detect. The challenge that we have is that if I detect a drone over my airport, I have no ability to do anything about it. The FAA, because this technology is not FAA technology, it can't be in the tower. So the FAA doesn't have the same visibility that we do as the airport on drones over our airports. So there's a couple things that can be done here, and it really just becomes some of that, a lot more coordination and collaboration of what we're seeing in the private sector into the FAA to solve some of these. On the issue of enforcement, if an operator is off the airport, who's responsible for that? I am not allowed to take a drone, do any kind of mitigation a drone over our airport. There's nothing I can do about it. Is it local law enforcement? But who has the authority to mitigate the drones once you've detected them? We can detect them. What do you do with it? That's the question that needs to get answered.
Yeah, people across the country are asking that very question. Thank you. Mr. Regan, as you note in your testimony, the 2024 reauthorization took steps to address mental health procedures among pilots and in the aviation industry, which is an issue about I've heard many concerns. However, the Biden administration's interpretation of these sections is unclear. In your opinion, what initiatives should the FAA take to clarify this element of the law and to address mental health challenges for pilots, mechanics, and controllers?
Thank you for the question. I think that the first step is starting, I think, in many industries, including aviation, where we have safety-sensitive responsibilities, whether you be a pilot or a controller or a maintenance worker. I think the acceptance and treatment of mental health conditions has lagged behind the broader country when it comes to recognition that this is a health problem that can be addressed through treatment, and with the right resources we can support people and see them through that challenge. Until we acknowledge that, and that people are not held at fault at risking their jobs because they are seeking help for something that they're going through, then we're not going to be able to adequately address the problem. And so we need to be able to clearly establish the health aspect of this and treat it as such, as opposed to the stigmatization that we've seen in the past around these issues.
Thank you. Mr. Bunce, this committee in the House have addressed various workforce challenges during our hearings and in the final reauthorization, particularly in terms of acquiring and maintaining the expertise necessary to certify new technologies, such as unmanned aerial systems and advanced air mobility technology. In your estimation, how is the FAA progressing on implementation of these rules to help the aviation industry?
Continue on, sir, with the program that they have for the knowledge, basically the experience of being able to get with industry and being able to share that knowledge. Again, I think the FAA has done a great job in trying to attract young people, and quite frankly, that's who you're going to attract at the wage level that you have available to the FAA. We in industry are always going to be able to pay engineers more and young people more, but it's a great building ground for them to go into government and be able to learn how to be a regulator, because they become very valuable to us in the industry. But we have to give them the experience, and the only way that they're going to do that is if we have this knowledge sharing and get them on the road and learn about the new technologies out there and learn from the experience that we have resident in U.S. industry. That's probably the only way we'll be able to do it, and I do compliment the FAA for taking this seriously, going in and making the budgetary moves within their internal budget to be able to get people on the road. And a lot of times we in industry will come to the FAA also and provide seminars and that for them on this new technology. But that's the only way it'll work. And that's why it is vitally important for us to continue on to be able to feed the FAA and to feed industry with young people through the workforce development grants that we need the appropriators to fund.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields. Are there further questions from any members of the subcommittee who have not yet been recognized? Seeing none, I do want to make just a comment regarding my colleague, Mr. Graves. While I must take exception to, well, let me just say this. I've always enjoyed our spirited conversations, especially the ones where I have been right, which is most of them when it concerns Mr. Graves. But I do wish him all the best, and I'm sure we'll see him more, and the same thing for him and his family. All right, seeing no other questions, that concludes our hearing for today. I would like to thank each of our witnesses for your testimony and your time here today. This subcommittee stands adjourned.